Our plan was to follow Samuel Palmer's life in reverse, starting at his grave, then winding back through his married years until we arrived at Shoreham, the place of inspiration. Well, those are the opening lines of the second part of my new book, The Farther Away. The book was inspired by the Japanese poet Basho, who wrote a series of poetic travel journals based on his journeys. And this book begins in Japan. This second section, though, is called The Valley of Vision, which was the name that Samuel Palmer and his artist friends gave to the village of Shoreham in Sussex. And this section of the book is based on one of those day-long pilgrimages. I and four artist friends make every year make a day-long pilgrimage, mostly to places associated with painters or poets who have inspired us. The four artists are Nicholas Mynheer, Mark Cazalet, Richard Kenton Webb, and Thomas Denny. And they're all joining me here today, which will probably be a little chaotic, but here they all are. So, am I still? Yes, that's all right. It was thank you, Mark. It was in 2013 that we set out for Shoreham, and as I said, we wanted to begin where Palmer was buried, in St Mary Magdalene, Reigate. But as I remember, there was quite a lot of traffic on the road, and it was actually a much bigger graveyard than I'd thought. And I can't remember. It took us quite a long time, as I remember, to find that grave. And which of you was it who found it in the end? Complete silence.
Nick.
It was you.
It was Nick, I'm sure it was Nick.
Well, it's a few years ago.
It was quite a few years ago. It was in 2013. So I'm going to well, I'll jog your memory. So I'll go back to the this was the there we are. That was the grave. And that actually, if I can see us again, we'll put us all back on. That was that was us putting the flower on the grave.
That's Denny and Cazalet, I think.
It is. It is.
Up to mischief.
I think Tom is showing Samuel the maker's mark of his coat, which is a
yeah. Well,
possibly.
showing due reverence, it seems to me.
yes.
Yeah.
But we went from there to.
Well, there's a nose as well.
Yes.
Oh yes, no, that's the Mynheer nose, definitely.
In the air, floating above them both. Yes.
On the top left. Yeah.
I remember thinking it's extraordinary that such a major figure, the grave wasn't sort of, marked in some obvious fashion. And in a way, I suppose it's quite nice that we had to search to find him.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, the next place. This was.
Oh yes.
Do you remember this? This was the.
Yes. Yeah.
Peering through the windows. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was in Red Hill where their son died, which was absolutely sort of devastating for them all. And he and his wife, they couldn't bear living in the same house, so they moved to actually near John Linnell, who was just hang up the hill from here. But when we arrived, I'd very carefully, asked if we could have a tour of the house. But something had happened when we arrived. I can't remember what it was now. There was they asked if we could just stay in the garden. But I think this was the window. and I think it was I think it was this must have been the first place where he actually had his own a kind of dedicated studio which he made for himself. Um, do you remember that we tried to
Yes. Yeah.
find, Blake's, because he as a young man he was taken to meet. I mean, John Lennon took him to meet Blake in his studio, and that he had Blake's picture. This was the um, pit leading Leviathan, which he was one of the Blake pictures he had in that studio, and I think that was that must have been the kind of model that that Palmer had for his studio, and it seemed to me quite interesting because all of us have at various times have made our own studios, um, and when I made just made this place. My model. I remember I came to see each of your studios, and um, Mark, you just finished making your studio, and that was my model for this. But I was interested in what was your model for when you because you sort of constructed your studio from I can't remember what it was, a garage or something.
I think it was bombed in the war. A Jewish father and son had been carpenters there, and they stayed on after the war. And then an Irish builder moved in, and then he moved out. So two really useful set of tradesmen, and then a sort of ne'er-do-well artist took over a shell. And I think my real intention came out of a wonderful spiritual direction session in which Patrick Parnell, my spiritual director at the time, said, "Your studio is like the Ark." And I sort of thought, oh, right, I'm going to arrive at Mount Ararat. And he said, no, 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 you are traveling hopefully. You're traveling on the promise. You may or may not get there, but you're traveling with all of the imaginative tools and animals that you need contained in this floating vehicle. And I suppose I've always thought the studio was a kind of prayerful ark, a place of hopeful journey. That's probably not what you wanted to hear, Roger. You probably
Yeah,
wanted to
it's
hear
fascinating. I mean,
writing.
that was okay. So that's so actually we've got several pictures of the studio. So this is
The important thing is it's triangular, and it has a long section of lighting on the previous image, Roger, which illuminates one work wall really well, with
right.
a kind of northeasterly light. It's not quite north, but I get lovely reflected light off the buildings opposite. But I hardly ever get light falling on the wall, which I really like. And it has completely clouded windows, so I can't be distracted because I find London very distracting.
Mm.
So I really want to be very internalized, but with good light, and to see the place. Well, if you go on to the next one, and the one after that, Roger, it's separated into a workroom, and then upstairs is a kind of library. And in the middle of that carpet, circular carpet, is where I meditate and pray in the mornings. So I have a kind of mappa mundi, if you like, on the floor. And, I kneel and pray in that and then go downstairs. This is where I have lunch and sort of entertain people if they come. So there's a separation between a design, prayer, eating space, and then a working space, and then on the bottom floor, storage, which is a mess.
Yeah.
And these are my
What are those funny warts on the wall, Mark?
so these are my friends. These are my real friends. You're my kind of stand-ins. But when I come back to the studio, I can talk to my real mates.
We haven't got little versions of us on there.
Roger, I think we could find you if we look hard enough. But I supplied an image of you that I found already, so we can come back to that.
Yeah. So I mean, that was what actually I think I found inspiring, and this was actually having these two separate spaces, because that's the thing that I've really imitated here. That I've got sort of downstairs, I've got a sort of place where I can do larger pictures, but
Yeah.
here I've got a place where I can write and also do sort of smaller pictures and sort of stuff and reasonable sort of size. But actually, I mean, in contrast to you, I find having I do find having a view quite helpful at points. Um, just because it's especially if you're sort of thinking, it's useful to have somewhere to stare out into.
Well, Roger, I should add that the opaque sticky plastic on the window screening, if I'm seated in my seat, it blocks out the opposite houses, so I just see the sky. So I do have a view, but it's just a skyscape.
Yes, and actually that also I imitated downstairs because likewise I look out on a garage here, but
Yeah.
I blocked out that but kept a bit of sky right at the top. So
Yeah. And I suppose to go back to Richard's comment, I wanted the studio to be a place that I really felt at home and could be playful and wasn't dour, wasn't associated with hard labor, but felt as if I really like I really like being there. And anybody who came in will get an immediate flavor of kind of who I was. And this is a private space. I'm not trying to project a professional identity. This is just me enjoying myself.
Yeah, and this is the stuff you're working on at the moment, or relatively recently.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yesterday, yeah,
fantastic. And I think I came to Nick, to your studio immediately after seeing Mark's, and it was well, you specially tidied this for us, so
Well, I was just thinking as Mark was talking, the similarity of it. He was talking about his studio as a result of a sort of bombed out building. Well, this looks like the bomb has just hit. It's how I work, and it looks absolutely chaotic. But I suppose it's a reflection of me as a personality interested in lots of things, and you can see all those sort of various things in there: cacti, bicycles, books, ephemera, work from other people, sculptures, paintings, drawings that I'm working on all at the same time. But as a studio, I very much felt it came out of the landscape that I live in, and if you can look through the sort of far windows, that they look over the garden, which looks over Ottsmoor, which is the landscape that I grew up in and played in as a boy. And as I sit here now in my studio, I can look out over the distant landscape of Ottsmoor. So it's very much come out of that, out of the setting that I grew up in, really. And it's very light. So it was built on, it had to be very light. But it's never any tidier than this. Occasionally it has to be cleared away so I can work on a bigger project. But if I'm carving, I work outside. So I don't have a studio outside. I like to work out in the garden. And if I'm designing or painting, then I work here.
Yeah. I mean, that we can see a few things out of the window there, which is, I mean, I assume that is actually. I was once when we were students, we were taken to Henry Moore's studio at is it Horsley Green, where kind of third of us were sort of taken down there, and we saw the different bits where he did his sort of different sort of sculptures. And at the end of it, there's a great man was sort of was wheeled in and sort of gave us actually he gave us a very nice talk about sort of drawing and stuff, but it was striking me how much of that was actually done outside, just where the sculpture has to work, I suppose, with
and I don't even like shelter outside. It's nice to have the breeze to blow the stone dust away and not to have any protection at all. And there's very few days of the year where you simply can't work outside. Mostly you can, and it's amazing how often in February you can sit outside and have your lunch because you've got used to the temperature. But
I think it must be a very different world that you live in, because Plymouth seems to be, there's certain definite times down here where you could not work.
Yes,
it just drops it.
Yes, yeah,
but maybe
Does
it's
it
a better
rain
climate in Oxford.
Well, it's quite wet in Oxford, actually, isn't it? But I mean, does that stop you, or can you still?
Well, it has to be. Yeah, if it's raining hard, you can't really. Well, I can't carve stone, but often, it's surprising how many days of the year you can actually work outside. And it's that you don't want a sort of dead light, but it's surprising how often you can work outside. But you end up working sort of builder's hours, so you start as soon as it's light, and you finished by sort of 3:30, 4 o'clock. So I can understand how why builders work the hours they do.
Nick, I particularly enjoy the two gnomes. I'm just looking at segues between our studios, and there are two very beautiful gnomes there.
They are.
Are they recent works?
Yeah,
they're
lovely.
Yes,
they're German, probably from the 1920s or 30s. But yeah, I mean, really beautiful pieces of sculpture.
Where are those?
Well, yeah, down by the if you look at the cacti, you can look down and there's a there's a standing gnome. Yeah, there we are. Absolutely fabulous.
And the bottom right-hand corner, Roger.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Right.
I can't remember the makers. Gertwig and Ertard, I think they are. Absolutely splendid. Germans are just so clever. And
this is where your viewers get concerned. Because they've seen the warts, and now they're seeing these
castings.
They're decapitated heads, and now they're going into gnomes. They thought we were serious people.
Well, actually, I also collect cake toppers, German cake toppers that are bisque, exquisitely carved and then fired. I mean, really lovely. From the turn of the century.
Are we going to talk about those birds?
Well, the Germans were the greatest carvers, weren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
I thought we might move into chicken soon.
There's one of your. Is that a recent sculpture or something?
Where's that? Oh yes, that's something that's ongoing, laid on the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
There's not a cockerel in sight though.
There's books on old English game in the cupboard, and connected ephemera.
Yeah. So Nick's sort of birds are all kept out in the garden out here. So that's what Richard is talking about.
Spurs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nick, can I ask? Is one of the reasons you have so much of your work visible that they kind of act as stepping stones for the imagination, that you can kind of move from what you have done into what hasn't yet happened? Is that a...
Yeah, some of them are ongoing pieces. I revisit and repaint or recarve or, add or subtract. And other things inform things that I'm working on. So at the moment, I'm working on a whole series of paintings and sculptures based on refugees, and in particular, people trying to cross the English Channel. So there's a whole series of sculptures based on that, and boat families and the Holy Family on the flight to Egypt. So they all sort of inform each other. Yeah.
I mean, I find it quite helpful to have at least some pictures around of my own, that just to inspire me that it's worked before, that it might sort of work again, as it were. I don't know if others find that. I mean, you have my pictures there, but you have your own.
Yeah.
Actually, the opposite for me, Roger. The opposite. Really? I like only the things I'm working on.
Same here. I don't want them anywhere near me.
Oh, right. Interesting,
yeah.
Only what's resting, or I don't, I don't know how it's going to dry. But after it's done, it can be wrapped up.
Yes.
When I know it's had its time, so to speak. No, but viewing things is a really, having a lot up to talk back to is a really important part of my kind of domain, I suppose, that it's kind of still, I'm still listening to it. But because of the pigment, it dries at such weird things, and what's underneath it dries at different times. What you think is going to do one thing, it starts to behave and does something else. So it's whether it needs more, or it can, or whether it's finished. But But I like that. I like that sense of um, it's ever changing.
Yeah.
I've kind of gone past that point where you think where I finished, that's how it's always going to look.
Mm.
Um, I think that's kind of problematic.
Yeah.
As if you can pickle everything in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, there are some objects that I just like to. I mean, Nick and I went to Sister Wendy Beckett's funeral, and at the end of they had all the pictures, the little icons that she'd had in her caravan, which we were allowed to sort of choose one. And I can't remember what you chose. I got this kind of little sort of icon here, which I always sort of keep
Yes.
there. But you know, just kind of there are some things that I just like to have around me, which like that, which you know, just as a uh, inspiring things. Anyway,
Yes, I had this little I don't know if you can see it, little crucifix, absolutely exquisite, painted on a little corpus of Christ, painted on this little wooden stick, and it very much reminded me of the work of Albert Herbert. And I said to the prioress, it reminds me of Albert Herbert's work, and she said, "Oh yes, I think it was probably him that gave it her." So I don't know, but it just seemed to, you know, summarize her sort of humility and was
He was a lovely man.
He was.
Sadly never met him. I went to a talk he gave in London, but never met him. I absolutely adored his Stations of the Cross. I don't know where they are now. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you all, I mean, how do you, I mean, I feel terribly private about my studio, and I absolutely loathe people coming in it unless I'm with them. And then I sort of, you know, I can cope with it, but I'm incredibly protective about the space. It's sort of a sanctuary, and I feel a bit guilty that I'm possessive about it. But how do you all feel about the spaces you work in?
Yeah.
Well, almost for the entirety of the time, I'm on my own. And I feel very comfortable and used to that. Perhaps once every few months, someone comes to see what I'm in the middle of. And so I can just about cope with that.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't want to go in your studio.
No.
Benito, speaking of camera.
Thank you, Benita.
Well, Tom, perhaps we could look at your because I mean yours must be the most sort of specialized of all our sort of studios.
Yes.
Did you have I mean, when you you built it, didn't you? Or was it a building?
Yes. No, we had it built when we came to this house. And it was actually based on the previous house, which was just a few miles away. I built a studio with the gable acting as the window against which I'd work on stained glass. And that was a system that was satisfactory. But here at Belchalwell, we made a similar building, but quite a lot wider. And the point of that was that in the width, I can work on painting, and in the length, I can work on stained glass. Because in the width, the single big window is to one side. But yes, it's fundamentally designed for working on glass. And I mean, here, the light all around the window I'm working on is more or less obscured. So I have various hangings to remove unwelcome light. I mean, of course, for stained glass, light is the enemy. One wants no light except coming through the stained glass itself. So that is a particular thing about it. The other factor, I suppose, about designing and making one's own studios, I'm quite preoccupied with how buildings look in the landscape. And so one of the things that gives me a lot of pleasure about my studio is seeing it from the other end, from the field. It's just a very nicely rendered gable with a little tiny ancient window that I salvaged from our last house in Gloucestershire. And it just looks beautiful and deeply entrenched in the landscape. Funnily enough, I've got an outside studio like Nick, an outside space for working. I have to do my acid etching outside. And my acid house, as I call it, has always been particularly depressing and grim, quite austere, with chicken wire fencing it from any intrusion. However, in just the last couple of weeks, I've turned my acid house into an etching bower by weaving the willows that I had to cut down from around the pond, weaving willows in the wire, and it actually looks very pretty now. So it just gives me pleasure in itself.
Gosh, well, that's so. I remember when I was doing my window that Andy was very keen on having an acid house in the garden, so I came down.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm glad this was look a little bit sinister, I have to say. Before.
Yes. As for what goes on in the studio, I was looking for a postcard to send someone this morning, and I came across one of Braque's studio paintings, which I've always loved. And I feel they do encapsulate what we do in our studios, that they're simple, earthy, structured places where we're thinking about organizing and making and building things. And then a bird flies through like a moment of revelation. And I think that his birds in his studios represent a kind of moment of spirituality embedded in the structure of the work we're doing. At least I feel that I feel connected with Braque and his studio paintings.
Yeah, no, that's quite nice. I mean, I've Mako Fujimura is a Japanese painter, very much thinks of his sort of studio as a kind of sacred space, which I can, I don't. There is something that you, when sort of ideas sort of come and you don't know where they come from. So I think that's a kind of nice image of the sort of bird flying through.
But also, things happen as a result of steady, sturdy work.
Yes, because I mean these windows they take you. I don't know how long. Is that a recent one? We're looking at.
That's the upper part of the Tisbury window that I'm looking forward to showing you.
Yeah.
The Tisbury window is so enormous that there was just no way of working on it as a whole.
Yeah.
So I worked on it in sections, and then had the terrible moment of
putting it all together.
Well, of seeing it all together.
Yeah.
Extremely nerve-wracking moment.
Yes. Yeah, well, we're very much looking forward to seeing that. I mean, Richard, yours is the most recent of all our studios. I mean, your previous studio, which was just a wonderful space. So it must have been difficult to move from there, but also exciting to build the new one.
Yeah, I didn't. Well, you say build. It's
I mean,
not like Tom.
No.
But yes, in the last studio, it was across the courtyard from the coach house where we lived for nearly 30 years. So moving to Plymouth, so I live in a park now, and the studio is part of the old public conveniences that used to be in the park but got closed in the late 90s and then sold off about 2007. Anyway, we moved in about a year after I came to Plymouth. And so I arrived in Plymouth in November 2020, and then we bought the house in mid 2021, and I had builders come in and it's in two parts. So you've got the ladies' side and the men's side, but it's got an adjoining doorway. And I paint in my feminine side, and the men's part is my storage area.
Right.
And it's literally a square. It's about 10 feet high. It's so it doesn't outlook into anything. It outlooks into the park, but I can't see it. But it's got a massive skylight right above me. So the painting wall, which you saw at the beginning, is the important wall. So you can fit something. It's about 25 feet by 25 feet. Anyway, so it's quite nice and wide. Behind you, in looking, you'll see in another image a lot of books. So I have a lot of paintings on the. There you go. So there's a lot of, like in Mark's upstairs, but it's all in one space. And you can go through that door where a lot of paintings are stacked up and carefully looked after and blah blah blah. But this is a viewing area whilst I'm working on the painting wall is very important. And at least kind of like 25 feet to really look at things and reflect on things. So the reflection time is really important, but the light is fabulous because of this massive hole that was drilled through the roof with a big skylight, which gives great light. But I've got good lighting too, natural lighting, synthetic natural lighting. So I can work, not quite 24/7, but you can work. Yeah. So it's I don't mind people coming to the studio. I don't mind people coming into that space. But on my time, so to speak. It's I love my studio.
So you tend to work on sort of series of paintings at a time, don't you? So
yeah.
So, I mean, I noticed that both you and Mark have sort of pictures up on the wall.
Yes.
Round, and is that you both seem to work quite like that?
Yeah. So it's letting them sit, and some of them. So those three actually are done. The one on the right's done, but so I'm just moving stuff around all the time. If you go to another picture, I can't remember what you got there.
Have I got another one? No, that's going back to Shoreham. So there we are. Yes,
there. So they're just really in progress, and next to the painting wall, and some that I think there might be one stacked behind there as well. So I'm kind of work on 3 or 4 or 5 at once. And then I just let them sit until, as I said, I feel like they've settled down. And as you see, I make all my own paint.
Yeah, and I was looking at your pigment collection there, which is amazing.
And the green boxes behind all those paintings is just full of pigment. So there's hundreds and hundreds of different pigments. And of course, there's to the right there's a vinyl player, so music. And so that kind of sense of silence or listening to spoken word or music is very much a part of, the space, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes, I like to have music on when I'm working.
Yeah. But it's it's an extraordinary. I mean, I see. I mean, what I'm working on here is a conversation with Shakespeare's one of his last plays, The Tempest, and the painting with a slightly yellow stick that's actually finished now, but is the idea of Prospero. We are Prosperos. We are magicians. That's what we do. We make things out of nothing. We make hope out of nothing. We make extraordinary things that weren't there but are there, and we can change things. I think it's an extraordinary thing, and I do think we are like Prospero.
Those look lovely, Richard.
Yeah, no, they look really. Yeah, I look forward to seeing it. Well, actually, I much look forward to seeing the studio. Actually, because none of us have I think any of us.
Actually, I mean, what is lovely? Just in the last week, I got this invitation to show a lot of this work at my university gallery. I'm in the university at the moment, in Art University Plymouth. There's going to be a one-man show in
Very good, Rich.
April. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that's nice.
Forward to that. Yeah.
And showing life drawings also at the same time, and in another little gallery, and just behind me a life drawing. And that sense of observation is so important to me. I'm able to imagine and make imaginative things because, you know, like we've all done, we learn to look, but you don't stop learning.
No.
I don't need to tell you that, Mark. I know you spend your life in teaching, you know, National Gallery and out and about. It's about being surprised. And I think that's what we get so much when we meet together. We get this extraordinary sense of wonder and surprise at kind of inhabiting near an artist or a poet or a musician's space of living. I remember the T.F. Paris one, when we were down in Dorset, was one of the profound moments of my life. Also, William Blake, we were in Westminster Abbey, weren't we?
Yeah.
That was an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Serendipity.
Yes.
And
yes, and
I do think we're given a lot of treats when we meet together.
Yeah.
As well as there's a lot of humor, but there's a lot of treats that we kind of, because our eyes are wide open.
That's the rewards of wonder, to use Ivor Gurney's phrase.
No, it's a lovely phrase. I mean, that sort of takes us back to Shoreham, actually, doesn't it? Because it's I mean, there are quite a number of houses that we looked at that were connected with Palmer in Shoreham. This was a house where his father lived, and this was one of the houses that I think he lived in, and they call it the Ancients. So there's this group of Calvert and Richmond and Giles, and there are sort of several others who came and sort of spent time with Palmer down in Shoreham, and sort of the Blakes also, William and Catherine, came and visited them. But the place that I found that was the most magical there was this little, which you remember. It was
They called the Rat House or something.
Was it Rat's Abbey or Rat's Alley? The various scholars, I think it must be the handwriting is difficult to decipher, but one of the two. And I think this was the place that he first lived, and it's where most of the crowd sort of came and sort of stayed. And when we got there, I mean, it's probably all changed now, but it was for sale. Do you remember? And and it was empty and just completely overgrown, all the garden, and you just sort of felt as if the ancients had just sort of walked out. It was incredibly evocative.
If I recall rightly, it was the barmaid in the local pub that directed us to it because we couldn't find it.
Yeah,
we called in there and she knew exactly where it was.
Yeah, absolutely. That was just really lovely, kind of, well, as you said, sort of serendipity of the thing. So this was the place that I did a painting of and sort of wrote the poem about. So that was my little painting, and so I'll just read you the poem that goes with this. So I got a little. That goes like this: a holy place, dew-drenched in poetry, where thick cow parsley crowds the cottage walls, and sunlight twisting down through tangled leaves lights footsteps in the pathway where it falls. Here, Calvert, Richmond, Giles, Linnell, Blake came down to Kent to find what Palmer found: a door of heaven and an angel's gate, where every field they trod was holy ground, where harvest moons lit flocks of sleeping sheep in valleys thick with vision, as with wheat.
Lovely.
And it's, I mean, it was extraordinarily like that, really, wasn't it? The, I mean, there's sort of hills and the, and it is it's still, fortunately, wonderfully unspoiled.
Yes.
And we saw those trees as well, didn't we?
Yeah, well, that was, yes, here we are. This was actually a moment of cinema. We went, it was in Lullingstone Park, wasn't it? And we were looking because which is just full. I think Tom, you found this is full of these incredible oak trees, really ancient oaks. Which I mean, Linnell told Palmer he ought to draw some, and he did these wonderful sort of.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah, and it's another of them. And we were trying to find the oak tree that he painted. And yeah, that's a possible candidate. Which were just amazing. And so anyway, we
the apotheosis of nodulosity.
that was right. Yes.
My goodness, there's a young man.
I know. This was 13 years ago.
I think that's what Tom was calling nodulality. Nodulality, what's he called again, Tom?
Nodulosity, I think, probably.
Nodulosity.
It was something like that. The see if I can find it. It was a wonderful phrase he had of the
Oh yes, that's right.
he was describing the where was it? Oh yeah, okay. The ponderous globosity of art.
Yeah.
Which he was actually applying this to trees. He said that the he talks about Milton writing about the pine and monumental oak had impressed him with the awfulness, the ponderous globosity of art. Large as the trees might be, the poet's tree is larger, which is nice. And it was, well, yeah, that's a picture of Palmer done, yeah, in 22, so not long after they went down there. And they apparently when the neo-romantic sort of painters in the 1930s went down to rediscovered Shoreham and went down there, they all sort of dressed up in hats and so we didn't go quite that far, but we did get a picture taken by a tree, if you remember. So so that it ended this journey with I sort of hung a camera on one of these fantastic trees and set the timer. So to end, which has been really fun recalling this, and I look forward very much to the next expedition, which will be again down to Dorset to see the new window, which will much at Tisbury, which we'll much look forward to doing.
Yes, indeed.
But anyway, so remembering back to the to watching the camera hanging on the tree, the things were counting down 1, 2, 3, and then it went click. So I shall count down, and we shall end with that. 1, 2, 3, click.
Click.
Ooh, and it hasn't even gone.
Roger, would you?
There we are, click. And that's us. 13 years ago. So I shall